Super.
Well, Monika, how are you doing? And thank you for joining us in the community conversations. But how are
Thank
you?
you. I'm fine. I had a nice day. It's Sunday and it's very freezing in Berlin. So it was like
Berlin, yeah.
-1 degree, but we are standing through. How are you? It's morning in LA, right?
It is morning,
Yes.
10 a.m. in LA.
And
Yeah,
it's sunny.
it's sunny. Yeah, typical LA.
Yeah.
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 So I guess we'll jump right into it. Well, if you didn't know, we have the 30 minutes of us talking, and then 15 minutes we'll leave for audience questions and interaction.
Yes.
So, what's your life story? What's your backstory? What are you up to?
That's a long story. I think actually it's funny when you ask this because I feel that somehow my life story has started before I even was born, because my interest also with like how my family's life has influenced me in my biography. So it's something that I'm really interested in my research. But generally, like, I think that often when I refer to myself, I kind of refer to myself as a person who has been between two cultures always. So I was born in Germany, but I have like also the Polish heritage. And this has greatly impacted actually who I am, and also what I'm doing nowadays in my artwork and also in my other social political project.
Right.
And this is something that I feel also has kind of paved my way to so many other journeys that I'm going on now.
Right.
So,
Right.
yeah.
Well, we spoke a little bit before about contemporary dance, about your the way that you express your art. Based on your background, how does your background influence your art? I mean, kind of how did you get into that?
So somehow it's interesting because I was born into a family that had nothing to do with art in the first place. But generally, I feel like that as an artist, one has to have a certain sensitivity for perceiving things differently. And partially, I think this sensitivity has developed for me by being born into a setting where I was always different. So being born into a German village as a partially Polish person and being the only family basically that had this migration background was almost kind of always turning me into this other person. And I think without me even wanting to be an artist, I was always using art somehow to translate my feelings and my emotions in order to also understand this process of being different and how I was treated. So I was starting very early, actually working a lot with textiles when I was younger, and working also with dance and different photography and other things. And I think later when I moved to Berlin, it was 2008, I was then going into other directions, also contemporary dance. And this is something though that this whole path, I never really, I went very, very intuitively. So I never really knew exactly how or where I would arrive. I think what was kind of guiding me was more my awareness that there was something more that I wanted to explore, this curiosity, this thought that I wanted to understand basically more about the world, understand more about myself, and also understand more about kind of this traumatic experiences that partially my family has experienced, but also that I was then projected on, like being kind of the other person and being the other in others and the people's eyes, and trying to understand what this actually meant. And I think art is a perfect way actually to explore this and understand this. And I think dance is another level also, because you work a lot, I work a lot with others, so I collaborate a lot with contemporary dancers. And I think like when I first got into it in 2015, I started to understand actually this advantage of using dance as a language that was non-verbal, because I feel like verbal language is often bringing us to certain borders. So we kind of cannot really explore so many things through the spoken language. We often arrive at certain stages where we don't know anymore how to express emotions, whether that's also anxiety or feelings. And I think with contemporary dance, especially, that it kind of allows us a very open and different language, makes it possible to somehow to
transcend.
translate certain things.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I agree with that. And we have spoken a little bit about that before. But yeah, there is a particular barrier. I mean, even with you, the village that you moved in, there's of course a cultural difference that you kind of had to overcome. So I imagine that using your art with dance or with whatever was a highlight. It was a joy to be able to, break through these barriers that were set forth before you.
That's
Yeah, but I think it's fun because I feel like in this village itself, I think I was still kind of bound to very certain ways. So I think somehow people who grew up in cities, sometimes it's interesting because village life is still obviously nowadays connected to internet and everything, but it still has certain traditional formats of how one should be, how one should act, how a woman should be, what it means to be a certain nationality are still imposed. So I think at that time when I was living there, I was like actually leaving after my A-levels, I was still very kind of confronted with the situation of always having to kind of fight in order to be who I actually am. And only in a city like Berlin or other metropoles, I think, is it easier for us to really break out of this concept and not constantly confronted with these projections.
Yeah.
So, Monika, growing up when your family moved to Germany, were you young or were you born there? What was the story there?
Yeah, it's a complex story as usual.
That's okay.
But actually, it's interesting because like this village where I was actually also growing up is the village where my mother was born. And it's a very, very old-fashioned village. You have to imagine 600 people. Some of them maybe have not left this village before. And then my father, he was the one who came from Poland actually to Germany. So it was around the 80s that there was in Poland the Solidarność movement. It was a trade union that a lot of Polish people were joining in order to fight actually for their working rights, for their human rights also. And at this stage, there was still an oppression happening from Poland, from the Soviet Union at that time. And the Solidarność Union, which my father was joining also, was like a really big impact on actually in order to destroy communism in the country of Poland. And I think as many people always associate communism with something more positive opposed to capitalism, it was actually in that example very negative. Like communism in the Eastern European countries was something very bad actually that was happening. So there were loads of countries that suffered and until now can feel the impact of communism from the Soviet Union, of weakening actually Eastern European countries. And people like my father, who was actually a lawyer at that time, had joined this union, and he was basically fighting in order to basically change something in the country of Poland and reclaim it, really. Like, because Poland has so many parts of history where it was always overrun, first from the Germans, then from the Russians and many other countries. And then my father was actually on a list where if he had stayed in Poland, he would have become imprisoned for doing the actions that he was doing. So he had to leave to Germany. And that's where, at that time, my mother, she's wanted to become a nurse. She met him through friends and they fell in love. And he was actually moving then to this village with her, which is a really crazy idea actually, because he was like living in a city in Poland, in Wrocław, which is like fairly big compared to other places. And then suddenly moving into this village, which was kind of nationalistic as well, like very concentrated actually on the German superiority, basically this idea of the Germans also in that sense to have these kind of prejudices towards countries like Poland and other places. And that's where basically he stayed though. So, and where he basically, where I was born in as well. But he was, actually, he died in an accident when I was a child. So I feel though I'm trying to always bring these puzzle pieces together to understand. And as a child, I think we feel already a lot, to feel how he also had not really felt he was welcome in this village as he may should have been welcome, because he was bringing also a whole new ideas and whole new cultures inside.
Right.
And I think as a child, I adapted a lot of this. I was observing a lot, and I got very inspired by that also.
Inspired. That's
Inspired.
Yeah, 'cause that's very interesting. Because I can only imagine, because those are very complex emotions, especially when, you know, of course, your father had passed at such a young age, or for you, such a young age. It's very complex. It's very difficult to sort of navigate as a child. So it's extraordinary for me to hear that you adapted to it and used it in a positive way, as opposed to, you know, I mean, a lot of different people, I guess, could have gone a different path, I suppose.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I think what you were talking about dance and how, you know, there are feelings that you can't express by words, but just the movements of dance that, you know, helps you, you know, share, you know, express and explore all those feelings that you know, sometimes we cannot. There's no words that this can describe it. So I'm glad you found dance and all the other wonderful work that you're doing. And I think when you just mentioned that you got it, it was inspiring. You were inspired. It comes into also your work with ourglad.org. Working because your father's history, and the reason why I'm bringing up that, it's because a lot of people that go through a lot of traumatic events like that, we take different paths, and then a lot of times in post-traumatic distress, there's generational traumas. How were you able to explore those type of, you know, things, post-traumatic stress or intergenerational trauma? What have you learned about it, or personal experience?
Yeah, I think that personally, probably now the work that I'm doing, I work on different art projects where also there's, such as Our Blood, where I'm working directly with refugees and collaborating with them and involving them in projects. And I think only to come to the stage, I had to actually work first throughout my own history. So to actually understand what this hurt, this pain of like actually this trauma that personally also my family brought into my life, but also the trauma that I personally was actually experiencing, going through. So I think that first I need to unravel this. I need to open this whole box that was really confusing and painful also to open, to understand kind of where certain anxiety, where certain emotions came from that I had. And this meant somehow a whole process where I also started studying psychology for some time to understand like this whole confusing setup that we inhabit actually as human beings. I think many humans, it's interesting because I think a lot of people have had intergenerational trauma, like where past families actually experienced something, but they kind of feel maybe alienated from this mind that they are given because they do not know how to handle certain things. Right. So I think like personally, I was investigating a lot of research to understand who is my family, and also to understand who am I actually as a kind of construction of this family. And this process, like that was like actually many years to comprehend this and to connect myself more with this. I was exploring not only research in psychology, but also neurology. I spent some time there, but also my own personal family biography, where I dared to ask questions to my family. I was like, I think this is something like many families don't like to openly talk about, the bad experiences that have happened, like even on my German side from my grandmother whose sister died in Second World War, and my grandfather who was actually fighting the Nazis also, and through that got punished as well. These kind of experiences often are so painful that they do not want to share this with the next generations. And I think this is very problematic because we actually, through this process, we as the next generation sometimes don't know why we have certain fears or emotions or nightmares even. And I think this whole process, it's a very ongoing process. I'm kind of still going to be probably for my whole life be trying to understand this. But in 2015, something crazy happened, like obviously like globally with this refugee situation was peaking. It was, and it's still ongoing, obviously. I think many people are not aware that actually the situation of people fleeing their home is something that has not, there's still people fleeing from Syria and many, many other countries in the world. But it has really triggered something in me. I think it has triggered kind of this situation of things that my family has experienced, and something where I realized actually I wanted to understand what people are going through of having to flee now. And it had led me actually to different social political projects, also activist projects, where I was trying to help with basically the privileged situation that I was then inside of being safe in the country that I was in, but also with my experience of knowing how it feels like to be treated as another person, basically.
Yeah.
And I used that a lot in the work. And in the Our Blood project, it's like a very fascinating journey also the past 4 years to have met so many people from so many different countries where very bad things happen to them, but that they have always had the strength to carry on. And I think this is something which I love and which also motivates me so much to do this work, to see actually that there's this strong, I like to think of us as these warriors basically that come out of the situation who want to change something in the world and don't kind of give up despite of the things that have happened in the past.
Despite the hardships, yeah.
Yeah.
You know what struck me when you were just speaking there? You seem to have just like a positivity or maybe a positive perspective on life. Were you always like that in terms of like, because you just spoke about speaking to your family, about asking maybe harder questions or talking about harder topics. Were you always like that because of the otherness, because you felt like maybe I deserve questions, maybe I deserve answers? I mean, were you always like this? I know I wasn't like that as a kid. I was terrified to ask my family about, you know, things that maybe were challenging or maybe traumatizing.
It's a good question, because I think that I sometimes have to remind myself of this whole journey, because I sometimes obviously also get frustrated of seeing, I mean, when we just see things happening in the world, in the news, or other things where right-wingism is increasing, or politicians are getting into power that should really not be in power. And then I remind myself, though, of certain paths of my journey. And I remember, especially as a teenager, I had a situation where I felt extremely depressed, like in some ways, of actually the situation that I was facing. And I think in a teenager time, anyways, you have so many things going on. And I think that I was in that time actually realizing or not having this identity struggle, basically, not really knowing who I was, and not having this Polish father that was kind of like part of my identity next to me, but being in this German setting. And in that time, even though I think I was carrying on to the outside, I had like really inside these demons struggling, basically. And I think that the thing that actually kept me carrying on was really not giving up to adapt, or as we would say, integrate to the situation, and just kind of being like people wanted me to be, but kind of using this otherness basically to inspire others. And I feel it's a bit like, it's like a game, basically, that when we give out good energy somehow, and when we do something and inspire others, it kind of comes back to us as well. And this is something which was kind of at that time, especially, or throughout my life generally, that in low moments, which always happen in life, that sometimes we feel really like we just want to give up and kind of not do anything anymore. We kind of suddenly, maybe in these moments, it's like the universe is kind of giving a sign that we should carry on, because it seems that we are doing something important by not going the normal path that is kind of the stereotype path, but kind of trying to go into another path. And I've always met different key people basically throughout this journeys, which were kind of like making me aware that I should continue going. It's something which I've perceived, I think as a child, I always imagined it a bit like a certain game. And I think I kept this idea in my head as well, that it's a bit like a Zelda game, that you kind of have to continue going and
It's like the next, the next step after step, and it's empowering. I think when you have success in breaking past these the mental blocks, or maybe these more painful things that stop most people from exploring, stuff to that depth.
Yeah. What do you think? What do you think happens when we allow the others in? I think there's something you mentioned, many phone calls prior to this interview, how playing with the other German kids, you were able to learn about them, and they were able to learn about you. You kind of, you did not change who you were, but also didn't change who they were. What do you think? Do you think that it's important for our whole society to learn something like that?
I think definitely. Basically, I like to research a little bit in the sociology as well. And I think we have this pluralized society now where loads of different identities live next to one another. And I think one of the biggest mistakes is to stay always in these bubbles, to always stay in comfortable bubbles where we kind of feel our opinion is confirmed. And I think throughout this life, I've actually realized how important it is to confront and connect with those people that we also feel are different or other, or maybe those opinions that we do not share. And I think something that I learned throughout this process is that we can always learn so much from one another when we actually, like you said, didn't open ourselves to others, when we allow others to come inside. I think it's something many friends of mine always say, that I'm brave for doing certain things, and I don't realize that anymore, because it became so natural to me somehow always to do the things that I was doing. But somehow for me, it's something, looking back, also a very important aspect to having opened myself up to situations that I did not feel comfortable or familiar with necessarily at first. And I think through that only can we kind of proceed and grow also, and share, kind of open our horizon. I like this idea basically of our mind, also like this horizon that is just only becoming more complex also by understanding so many different opinions.
Yeah. That's that brings to mind a book I'm reading. I don't want to speak too much about it, but it's a book it's called Factfulness by Hans Rosling. And in the book, he mentions this sort of construct that we form as people. We form as it's like the us versus them, and that sort of thinking. It's archaic in a way, but it's very divisive.
It is,
And what you just said, that's kind of what we're all about in terms of broadening our horizons, broadening our perspectives. But you learn so much more stuff that you didn't even know you knew, right?
On the other side of fear.
On the other side of fear, but just you just broaden yourself, you broaden your perspective, and it only helps to connect with different people. Like you're in Berlin, we're in Los Angeles. That alone, what we're doing right now is an example of us learning and again broadening our perspective. It's necessary to continue the growth. And like you said again, the Zelda sort of level by level, getting further and further into what I think we all need to be spending more time doing.
I think so. I think so. It's really inspiring.
Yeah.
It is. Yeah. It's especially with what's going on here in this country. The other day I was thinking, when having the sense of belonging and the sense of entitlement, those two things are really like you're looking for something, but even though they're the same thing, but the feelings are completely different. So it's more like when you want to belong, you are not excluding anyone. You are inviting everyone to be with yourself, with you, And it's more, I think we as human, we're meant to connect.
Yeah.
In order to survive. But the sense of entitlement, that's where all the anger comes from, and that's where you exclude everyone, and you're lonely, you have all this hate that is not necessary.
And fear too.
And fear.
You create these weird ideas that you create reasons to be afraid of people.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the fear is something really crazy, because like this book that I read, like I'm always like to refer to it. It's this Austrian philosopher called Isolde Charim, and she's talking about this pluralized society, and she says actually that now in a time a lot of things are moving, things are dissolving and changing, that certain people who previously have identified themselves, especially over the national government or something like this, are becoming scared, because it's literally like they do not know anymore who they are, and they're suddenly being confronted with so much difference. And I think it's interesting because somehow personally I'm so happy in that sense that I never identified myself over a national kind of government as such, or had this urge to do this, basically, because I feel the situation that we find ourselves now, where everything is really changing, and fortunately some things for good also, that somehow I do feel it's more natural for me that things are also collapsing, and that concept as a way of like this phoenix image, that things can only then kind of become alive and become new again.
Interesting. I like the way you put that.
I do. I love it. Yeah, it does make sense.
Yeah. You mentioned in one of our previous conversations the German word that means commonness. What is that word again?
Gemeinschaft, you mean? Like, you mean community, right? Gemeinschaft.
Yeah. It really spoke to me. And I guess it's relevant to what we're talking about right now, but commonness, and I'm sure you learned that from a young age, right?
Yeah.
I don't remember what concept you did bring it up, but I think it was very...
I try to remember. I think that it's interesting because I feel like with this union that my father was in, also the Solidarność, which Solidarność means translated to solidarity, actually, also.
Yeah.
So for me, it's interesting because I feel like this has kind of inspired me a lot to think that this idea that people from all different backgrounds and very different identities actually came together to fight for one thing, which was the fight for basically equal rights. And I think this is something that in our society now, like this Gesellschaft and this Gemeinschaft, that we need to find ways again to find together and come together as basically people from very different backgrounds, and try to fight actually for our rights, because I feel, especially in such a political time as now, like democracy becomes questioned again, because many kind of strange politicians gain power. And I think in America, this is something that I find super fascinating happening right now. And in the past year, also in Belarus, where also some of my ancestors came from, that people go on the streets, and people who themselves are not necessarily friends, but they are like common. They find commonality basically for something to fight for. And that's something that I feel is now a very big strength basically of our time, that certain things like this happen again.
And then through that sort of that unity, we become stronger than the people who try to oppress or try to silence those voices.
I feel like it's funny because I have this it's similar. Somehow I think in childhood we learn a lot of things and we should stick to those things, because I have this one idea from childhood that always when someone wanted to make me feel bad or sad or somehow in this sense, I felt like I don't want them to win. So they would win if I would be sad or would not feel happy. And I think it's funny, I adapted this until nowadays, that always when I feel somehow, whether me or someone who I care about or friends or other people whom I think shouldn't feel sad, when this other person or group or institution or whatever it is trying to kind of oppress them, I feel like it's even motivating me more to see that I don't want them to be happy to make other people sad. So this is something that I think is very crucial somehow, in the sense of keeping on fighting actually in such a time, also for different causes that can make us really frustrated sometimes also.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
There's truth. that's
That's
that.
yeah. There is a lot of truth. I think it's that speaks for forgiveness as well. When like bad things happens to you, and I think I'm a survivor, so that's a concept that we always talk about. But sometimes we don't understand it, because when you think of forgiveness, you're thinking you're giving power to the other side, to the perpetrator, whoever harmed you. But in reality, you are giving yourself more power. You are you are empowering yourself in a way that you're not allowing what happened destroy you. So it's kind of that same thing as a child. If you learn that as a child, the forgiveness comes within your heart.
Again, that's such a hard thing.
Yeah,
it's
hard. But for a kid to understand that, because it's our natural instinct to, when we feel scared or threatened, to find refuge in your parent or whatever. But to stand your ground as a kid and be like, well, no, I'm not going to let you win.
I was not that kid.
I'm not that kid either. So hearing you say that's fascinating. And,
I have to say that it takes a lot of time also to actually allow that to happen, to understand actually that, like you said, like that we need to forgive, because even when I was once in the Buddhistic monastery, this really amazing woman that I met there, she had lost her husband in, actually, I think it was Taiwan, and something really terrible happened to him because he was also politically active. And she said, even as you have to imagine her as a Buddhistic nun sitting there, and she said something really honest to us. She said that even her meditating every day and kind of wanting to basically do good, she cannot just release herself from these negative feelings. She can't let go of this, because I think it's something like a trauma, also something like this when happens, that we sometimes, it's a really big, hard, difficult thing basically to let go of this negativity. But I think, like in her case and also in many other cases, we can use that as a kind of catalyst for wanting to do better and not wanting to be bad, basically, like other people who do bad things to others.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's true.
Absolutely.
I wanted to use this time to acknowledge our community here and scroll through our comments section.
You have a lot of...
Yeah, I saw a bunch of people had waved to you specifically, Monika. They like you a lot.
You're funny.
And I know we had, who is that? That's Jolly Miriam? Bonjour?
It says what?
Bonjour? That's it, right?
Yes, bonjour.
I try hard. And then we have Masha Wonderlust waving just to say hi to you. Thank you so much for joining us, you two, and everybody else who has waved and joined us.
If you have any questions towards our wonderful Monika, please just type them in. We will try.
We have lots more questions ourselves, but please feel free to get yours in.
Yes, but we still have more fun things to ask you, just in case somebody hasn't asked anything yet. You have something?
Yeah, I do. So again, one of our previous conversations, you had said the universe gives. That's a very strong concept that I think that resonates for the both of us.
Yeah.
And I think that's also resonated with you in your life and the work that you've done. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, I remember when we talked about this, I really liked how you also felt connected to this, because I think many people find this is a very abstract and odd thing, basically. But personally, it's interesting because I feel that I was raised Catholic, but I actually stepped out of church, so I don't really necessarily feel so connected with the church. But but I have kept somehow this connection to something that I cannot explain. And I think many things that have happened to me in my life that were very negative and things that haven't going well, I've still always kind of found really positive approaches and found really amazing people in my life where I would get a lot of power from. And I kind of realized somehow that I do not know whom to thank for this. And many people like to always say of like angels or guardian angels or things like this. And I think this is a very beautiful image. And I like to think somehow as this universe, just as a whole, that we also as humans still have not really understood yet. What is this universe? How, like this philosophical question of how do we actually come to exist in such a complex and weird world? And I think it's interesting because I like to always kind of see this universe as a place when those people that dare to actually break out of this normal path, of this like society given path that is like telling you who you are supposed to be, or who you're supposed to be as a woman or as a certain person from a class, to break out of this path and to dare actually to go into this unknown situation and to explore things. This is something which is really rewarding. And I think in our conversation also, like where I said, like it's somehow like the universe is rewarding those people that dare to break out of these situations that are common, that are that are kind of given as a human-made situation.
Oh, now I remember, because you had said, I remember what I said. And it was actually a quote from Will Smith. And you actually said it a moment ago in our conversation.
I did?
Will Smith said, God put the best things in life on the other side of terror.
Oh, yeah.
And that's what kind of reminded me of that. But it's true, right? I mean, when you, like you just said, when you do have the courage to break out of whatever societal norm or familial norms, things that family may think that you should be doing, I think that there's real strength, and then many great things in life lie on the other side of taking that first step into the unknown.
Yes, it's true. There's this really nice image that I remember in high school when I had philosophy class that our teacher was showing us. There was like this, in history when people thought that the earth was flat, there's this really crazy thinking that happened. And then some people really made aware that the earth was round. And then they made this really beautiful illustration where there's like this globe and this star wave basically, and this person is crawling behind this star kind of textile in order to understand what is behind. And I think this image stuck so much in my head, to look always behind, to try to understand what actually lays underneath this whole surface of things, and try to get into to the understanding of things that maybe are not uncovered. This was always something that I loved. I always loved kind of the unknown actually, and those things that people were not familiar with, and these paths that may have also been risky and dangerous.
And it's always rewarding too.
I think so. I think so. Even if the thing that you get on the other side, that you find on the other side, isn't as rewarding. It's the experience and the journey that you have to take for yourself, and the strength that you may gain from taking that journey.
Yeah, and it takes a lot of courage.
Yeah, it
does. Yeah, I know about that. As we're talking about this, I think I am thinking you are a very hopeful person. What do you think of hope?
Hope.
Yes.
I think it's interesting. Hope. Yeah.
Yes.
I think because some people say optimistic, right? And I think that I have learned actually for a time, I don't say that I'm optimistic, I'm more realistic, because I like to say that I think things are always possible. And I think I always carried hope in certain situations where I think many people were believing that things would not work out somehow. And I think it's connected what we just said also, this kind of daring to explore something that has not been explored before, to try to understand. And hope plays a big part in that, definitely. It's like hoping I mean, it's like these nice gestures of saying like fingers crossed, like you kind of make these rituals. I mean, I do personally also, like I do these rituals for myself to make myself feel like things will work out. And I think actually in positive psychology, it's a research area. They have actually found out that people who are remaining hopeful and positive, that they would actually become, for example, in certain situations, they become healthy quicker, they can recover quicker, they can heal quicker. And I think also that we attract through this also more positive things when we have this mindset.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm.
Yeah, I like it.
That's
Yeah,
nice.
I like that. I think hope really carries you into things that
Yeah.
all the scary moments, you just keep hoping for better.
It's true.
Yeah.
Especially with the times we're in now, it's uncertain
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes scary. But that sort of thinking can definitely lend itself to just getting you out of bed in the next day. Just so you can continue to try.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Try, moving forward.
Yeah.
As much as we can all do, we can all hope for.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. Should we ask her a message?
Say again.
Should we ask her our last question, the message
That's it.
to the world? I got
Yeah,
that.
you got
I got
that.
that one.
Mhm.
Okay. So, Monika, what's your message to the world, to the young people, women, young men, men, older, everyone, any race and religion?
I think that something I've learned throughout my life is that things that I've said also, not to give up, and most importantly, don't let yourself become like a projection display for others. I think it's super important to understand who you are versus like what other people think who you are, what other people try to project onto you. And I think once one has figured out really this understanding of the essence of oneself, it is much easier to kind of connect with those people and like go on this path that actually is supposed to be there for you. And I think this is something I always remind myself of: negative situations, that what is it versus who I am versus that what maybe other situations have kind of projected onto one, like whether this is victimization or other situations. I think this is something which makes people who are different and who also are for good different, because it's important in this world there's a difference, that this gives strength to people on their path and in their direction. Yeah.
Wow, it's beautiful.
Great words.
I'm definitely taking that with me.
Yeah.
Thank you, Monika. You're amazing.
Thank you.
And
You too.
really appreciate you to say yes to our
The conversation. You are the first guest of 2021. We're honored to have you.
smile.
Yeah, and I'm sure everybody who has listened and who will listen will take quite a bit from this conversation. So thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone, to have joined us.
Thanks for your patience with us, and of course our regular technical situations. And please don't forget to go support the nonprofit Our Blood. They're doing great work over there. And,
they are.
Yeah. So until next time, thanks again. We'll see
February.
you. February.
Yeah, we'll see you in February. One Sunday in February.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
everyone.